This week we're counting down the 4 most annoying scientific inaccuracies in modern sci-fi cinema, as opposed to all the scientific inaccuracies in romantic comedies. And yes, for the record, this post is in honor of the recent Ken Ham-Bill Nye debate over creationism versus evolution. No, excuse me, I mean intelligent design. No, actually no, I think they're saying teach the controversy? No, apparently they're calling it historical versus observational science.
And what a pile of bollocks!
Before we begin, one quick disclaimer. I will be spoiling the following 5 films in this video. Number 4, Sound in Space. Hoo boy. Sound in Space. This is a big offender. Who can't resist the urge to Foley in a little background noise when shooting an action scene in space? George Lucas. The answer is George Lucas. Long story short, there is no sound in space. Sound is a compression wave. It needs to compress something in order to travel from whatever source of the sound is to our ears. On Earth, common vectors include water, rock, and of course, air, of which there is none in the vacuum of space. Who got it right? Serenity, Alien, 2001: A Space Odyssey. Gravity did well by this rule too. Occasionally you could hear the clanging of metal against metal throughout the film, but I'll give them that because they only ever did it when one of the characters was touching the surface of whatever was making the noise. The sound was traveling through whatever was being touched and into the bodies of the characters, where the audience was able to hear it. In other words, the sound did have a medium to travel through. God, I've overthought this. No, you know what? I haven't overthought this. You know who did? Number 3, the misrepresentation of temperature in space. Most movies give the impression that space is only ever cold, but it's not. With no air to insulate us in the vacuum of space, temperature extremes actually vary quite dramatically. Some Hollywood films play lip service to this fact.
What's it gonna be like up there?
200 degrees in sunlight, minus 200 in the shade.
Others go out of their way to actually depict the temperature differential. But most simply portray space as a place of perpetual cold. Which brings me to an even bigger pet peeve related to the presentation of temperature in space. A subset of the original peeve, if you will. The instant freezing astronaut. Long story short, you might freeze within a couple of seconds at minus 200 on Earth, but not in space. Once again, the reason is because space is without air. See, objects lose heat in 3 different ways: convection, conduction, and radiation. The first 2 methods, which are by far the most efficient ways to lose heat, require matter in order to work, like air or hot pockets. With neither air nor hot pockets in space, the only option left is radiation, which is way more inefficient. Long story even shorter, it could take up to 45 minutes for you to freeze solid in the vacuum of space. If you got blown out of an airlock, you'd die of asphyxiation about 42 minutes before you died of hypothermia. Speaking of getting blown out of an airlock, number 2, explosive decompression. The myth here seems to be that if you get blown out of an airlock in the vacuum of space, you'll bleed from every orifice and then explode. Not true. We know this because spacesuits have accidentally ruptured in vacuum experiments here on Earth. And thankfully, the test subjects didn't. Not that it doesn't represent a danger, mind you. The test subjects in question lost consciousness within seconds, and had they stayed in the pressure chamber for more than a couple minutes, they would have certainly died of pulmonary embolisms. Little air bubbles getting pulled into the bloodstream and blocking the flow of blood. A nasty death to be sure, but hardly an explosion. Who got all this right?
Kima, we need a pickup here.
A little late for that.
Ever wonder why Corso told Kale to exhale rather than inhale before he kicked open that windshield like the backstabbing badass he is?
Exhale.
You gotta be kidding.
Exhale.
Oh, no.
You'd think he would have told Kale to inhale since there's no air in space, but exhaling is definitely the tip that saved his life. Remember, the vacuum of space is the ultimate low-pressure environment. The millibars are essentially zero, way fewer than the inside of the human body. So when suddenly exposed to the vacuum of space, all the air inside your body suddenly wants to be outside. But not so much that it can break through the skin, hence the no exploding. But it can still get pulled into your bloodstream and kill you. By ridding their bodies of excess oxygen, Corso and Kale were reducing their chances of getting embolisms, which would have killed them way faster than asphyxiation would. So wait, where did this myth come from? Well, long story short, it is possible to suffer explosive decompression, which is unfortunately exactly what it sounds like when suddenly exposed to a large pressure differential. But the difference has got to be much greater than what you experience when you go from sea level to the vacuum of space, a drop of only 1 atmosphere. If you want to do some sobering research on the subject, go check out the Wikipedia page on the Byford Dolphin diving bell incident of 1983, in which 5 deep-sea divers were accidentally subjected to a drop of 9 atmospheres in less than a second. Not to get too grim, but the one consolation is that they all died instantly. Number 1. Dinosaurs. Movies are my great love, but they weren't my first love. No, long before I decided I wanted to become a filmmaker, I wanted to be a paleontologist. Dinosaurs and their kin have always fascinated me. I assume they fascinate everybody, but I'm told I take it beyond the common interest. I'm no scientist, but I like to think I'm about as schooled on the subject as any amateur can be, and thus, I can't help but hope for some better representations of Mesozoic life in the near future. Velociraptor was really only 3 feet tall. Utah Raptor got to be about 6 feet, but it was only discovered when Jurassic Park was already in post-production. All raptors had feathers. T-Rex probably did too. Dinosaurs did not drag their tails. Dimetrodon was a synapsid, not a dinosaur. Pteranodon was an avametatarsalia diapsid, but it didn't have a perforated acetabulum, which means it wasn't a dinosaur either.
Yeah, I've said that many times.
Predator to prey ratios tend to hover very reliably around 1 predator for every 100 potential prey animals. So Skull Island was populated with way too many V-Rexes. Dinosaurs did not live alongside people. With all of that said, and with all of those examples shown, I wouldn't dare diss Jurassic Park for its scientific shortcomings. At the time of its release in 1993, it presented what was probably the most scientifically accurate portrait of dinosaurs ever constructed.
It's a dinosaur.
Which would be impressive in and of itself, but what really gets me is that in the 21 years since, nobody's really been able to improve on it. Maybe Jurassic World will change that? Don't hold your breath.